Hello there, welcome back. So, we are going to start moving away from the coal plant today. I did make a few more small design tweaks, not too big, but just to add a little bit more to it. Also rerouted some of our power poles, which I'm going to do a little bit more on later once we get building back at our main base. But what we're going to talk about today is what the plan is for the main base. The main base is where we're going to be building all of our resources. We're going to bring them all together and try to build them in more or less one spot. The big challenge that I'm giving myself there is that I would like to start setting up the main base for bringing us to the late game. The late game recipes require a lot of resources, so we need to, and a lot of complex parts, and so I want to start making a bunch of those parts now and just getting everything ready and in line for making that progress in the future, so that'll be very easy for us. If we one of the things that we technically unlocked the recipe for, but we can't make it yet, is heavy modular frames. Well, we're going to be needing a lot of those late games, so I want to make sure that we have all the things we need for them. We're going to need a bunch of steel for that, encased industrial beams, steel pipes, and the like, and I want to make sure that we have all the production set up so that when we get to that point in the game, when we're able to make those heavy modular frames, we can't make them yet, but when we're able to make those heavy modular frames, that it's very easy for us, that we just take the resources that are coming in, or the resources that we're already producing, and send them over to a heavy modular frame factory, just start building it there. That being said, this does lead to a few caveats, which is that we're going to need a lot of resources. And so the building that I'm going to be doing for the next little while, all of these different towers, is going to be with the intent of consuming more resources than we can currently send to them. So like limestone's going to be the next one that we work on. We're going to have, I'm going to expect that I am sending 2 fully overclocked miners towards them. We have 2 pure limestone nodes near us. I'm going to assume that we're sending 2 overclocked of those, and maybe a few others that are nearby on the map. But those pure miners already produce 240 without overclocking them, and our best belts only handle 270, so we can't actually be processing those resources, but that is okay. We will eventually unlock that potential, but I'm going to build as though we can process that many resources. That is the kind of important thing here, which is that is the ultimate plan of how to handle the next phase of building, is to build hopefully as big as we need for the late game. But before we do that, I did a bit more hard drive chasing, and I found some more hard drives. I don't have any coal on me. I'll fix that later. Found a few more hard drives, actually to the point where we can no longer scan any more hard drives. There are no rewards currently available, which actually leads me to wanting to check something, which is that there might be no more rewards available, or there might be 1 more reward available, since all hard drives and rescanning of the hard drives produces 2 recipes. I wonder if by making 1 recipe available, if we'll be able to start scanning another hard drive. So if there's just 1 recipe that's not on this list that we could grab. So 1 recipe that I do want to grab is this inventory slots recipe. I just want to have a little bit more space in my inventory. I know there's some other options for us to use to make that less of an issue, but it's still a good one to get out of the way. And then this recipe will go back to the pool, this alternate fused quartz crystal. We'll go back into the pool of recipes, and if there are 2 recipes in that pool, then we can scan another hard drive. If there's 0 in there right now and this becomes the only one in that pool, that's fine. We don't really care a lot about this recipe, so I'm not super bothered by it being kind of isolated in that way. So I'm going to select this reward and see if we can start scanning. Nope, still unable to scan. So there's currently only that quartz recipe that is there. Okay, but why did I get more recipes? I thought we did have a lot of them, a lot of the recipes that we wanted. And weren't really looking for too much more. Well, there was some recipes that I kind of changed my mind about. Once I started doing calculations, I realized kind of where we were at with some things. For one, so we're going to go through these recipes, hopefully a little bit quicker this time than the previous time. Here we have this automated speed wiring, which we do want. We don't care about bolted iron plate. We're going to use the stitched iron plate that allows us to use wire instead of screws. Here we have rigger motor. We don't have a lot of Caterium, so using quick wire stators is just not going to be really good for us probably, and using iron pipe and wire is going to be just more effective. So we want the rigger motor. We can't make it right now, and we do have a fair bit of quartz, so we're going to see about making a bunch of these crystal oscillators. Though after doing the calculations and looking at some of our future planning, cable might start to be an issue. Having enough copper for cable might be an issue, so we're going to be looking at that in the future. Here we don't really want anything to do with screws, so we don't really care too much about this recipe, other than getting it out of the sequence, but might as well just be using rescans and stuff and just holding it here. Alternate fused wire is another recipe that we don't care too much for. It uses Caterium. I did mention we'd have cable and wire issues later in the game, potentially, just because of the available amount of copper to us. But Caterium is also a very limited resource to us, and so I think that might be a larger scarcity for us. I'll have to see when we get to that point in the game, but right now that's kind of where I'm at there. Encased industrial pipes is one of the recipes I wanted. So if we look at this recipe, it takes 6 pipe and 5 concrete, whereas the original encased industrial beam takes 3 steel beams and 6 concrete. Now that sounds, oh, that's a little bit more concrete but fewer steel beams. But the problem is that steel beams use a lot of steel versus steel pipe. So 4 steel goes into 1 steel beam, whereas only 1.5 steel goes into 1 steel pipe. So that's more than 2.5 times as much steel. So when we unlock that, so if we grab this encased industrial pipe recipe, we're using the steel beams take 12 steel ingots, and the steel pipe, if we just use the base recipe to get 6 steel pipe, we only use 9. So that's significantly less. And then we have alternate recipes of molded steel pipe, which uses even less steel. It would only use 6 steel instead of the large amount from the steel beams. The other thing this helps us do is it helps us simplify production to just producing a lot of steel pipe. We can just mass produce steel pipe in whatever way we want, and then just send it to a bunch of our recipes that use steel pipe. So if we go back to this list of recipes, we click steel pipe. We have 2 different ways to make it right now. There's a third, we're about to look at that. But then we have stators are going to use steel pipe, nobelisks, which we do want to automate, rotors, modular frames, which we need to make a lot of, and then a few more recipes down the line that are all going to be using steel pipe. So if we can just produce a bunch of steel pipe, that's going to allow us to streamline our factory a lot more. Whereas steel beams, we do need them for versatile framework. We're going to replace the encased industrial beam recipe with steel pipe, and then we don't really need them for much. There's a lot fewer recipes that steel beams go into. So we really are only going to need them for versatile framework, which we do need a lot of, which is why we have this alternate encased industrial beam recipe, because the base industrial beam recipe oh no, we don't have an alternate there. That's why we have this alternate molded beam that uses a lot less steel. It uses, what is that? More than a third or more than a quarter less steel, so maybe about like 60%, 70% less, 70% as much steel, so like 30% less steel, which is going to make our steel go a long way. That could lead to possible issues of just having too much steel, but I would be really surprised. My calculations are kind of suggesting that we'll have maybe a little bit more steel than we need, but I feel like having too much steel is a perfectly fine issue to have. So we are going to grab this recipe. I'm actually going to go ahead and grab it now, since we know we don't need to re-roll anything. We've already unlocked all of the currently available rewards, so everything we see here is everything that's available, and we'll just be returning steel rod back into the hard drive pool. So we're going to get these encased industrial beams. Next up, we have, okay, we did the fuse wire. More screws, cast screws, very good really early if you want to make screws. I don't want to make screws, not doing that. Alternate steel cast plate. There is actually a decent chance that we end up with a lot of steel, to the point of kind of having excess. And a lot of the items that normally just require iron, we're going to be making with steel instead. Like modular frames are going to be using steel pipe. And because of that, it's actually a little tempting, since we're already sending iron ingots over to the steel factory with the solid steel ingot recipe. So there's already going to be iron ingots and steel together. We might actually want this eventually. I'm not going to get it yet, but if we start finding that we have a lot of steel and we want our iron to go a little bit further, we might start using this for the reinforced iron plate, which isn't used in too many recipes, but it is a very foundational recipe. It's basically used in reinforced iron plate, which is used in modular frames, and it just goes down the line. Modular frames is going to be built into a bunch of other stuff, so we do want to make a lot of modular frames. So I may be grabbing that later, but I'll leave it alone for now because we're not to building that section. Copper rotors, they use screws. We have a way that doesn't use screws, so we're going to stick with that. Charcoal would help me to maybe make some coal here instead of go all the way to our coal plant for coal, but not a huge issue otherwise. Alternate bolted frames. We have a recipe we like for this. It uses steel, which is another funny thing. Modular frames is the only recipe we have that will use iron rods, and the steel frame stops it from needing iron rods, which means that we don't really need iron rods anymore. Oddly enough, we'll be able to skip out on iron rods, which will be, doesn't show up in any recipes, but that's why we didn't care about that steel rod recipe from the previous one. That is no longer visible here. So we don't really care about this modular frame recipe. And then copper could be tight. Argentarium's tight, so this recipe is nice in that regard, but our copper may also be tight, so we might not have enough copper to spare to make fused quick wire. So we're not going to be too keen on that right now. Here we have alternate biocoal and alternate iron pipes. The iron pipe is a tempting recipe to grab, and it may be one that I grab later. It is a very good recipe. It allows you to make a lot of really complex, usually steel-dependent recipes with iron pipe, or with pipe, and just from iron. You don't need to make steel to get it, you just make it from iron, which is really effective in simplifying some factories. But our main factory is going to have a bunch of resources coming in from all over. We're going to have coal coming in, we're going to be making steel with it. So we don't necessarily need iron to supplement that unless we're just limited on coal. And it's possible, but right now, like with the calculations I did, it looks like we're going to actually have plenty of steel. And we actually might need a little bit more iron, even though we have a lot already, because this iron pipe, or this steel pipe turning, this iron pipe recipe is going to make us able to use our iron for other things, and that is going to tax our iron. As it turns out, we may just not have quite enough iron at base to fund some recipes that steal iron away. Here we have wet concrete, kind of good recipe to make your concrete go better. It's also good in getting rid of water. We don't need it right now. We don't even have the thing that it's produced in, so we're not going to get it. But a lot of these wet and pure, I think we saw one of those earlier. I don't know, like steamed copper sheets, these recipes that use water. Water is a very plentiful resource on the map. It's usually pretty easy to send it into factories and just make resources more efficient. Use less of a resource. We use less copper for these copper sheets, about half as much copper. Same thing over here in the wet concrete. We use half as much concrete, and that's going to be really effective. But we don't even have the building that runs it, and it also has to be by water, which for our current plant we're not going to be doing. We're just looking to import more resources. Here's a way to make silica. This would be useful if we didn't have a good amount of quartz. We have 2 pure nodes and 1 normal node of quartz, which means that we actually have a lot of quartz that we can rely on. And even late game, when I do think our quartz might be taxed, especially if we want to make things like rigger motors that use crystal oscillators, which use a lot of quartz, each of them. There's a reason this recipe has 1 crystal oscillator to 6 motors, and it's because crystal oscillators are expensive items to craft. There we might want to make our quartz go a little bit further, but I don't think we'll actually need that right now. Next up we have basic iron ingot. We're actually, because of our steel recipes, a lot of our steel recipes use our concrete, and we'll be seeing that here. If we look at all these concrete alternate recipes, there's a few more that we don't have, but we're going to be using concrete for encased beams, molded pipe, molded beams, and a different version of encased beams. So we're going to be using it for these 3 recipes, primarily to make a bunch of pipe, but also to make our steel go further with steel beams. We're going to be using a lot of concrete, and sending it over to help our iron supply probably isn't going to happen. We're probably going to find other ways to stretch our iron supply. Possibly just by finding more iron nodes, or kind of reallocating how we're using recipes, because iron is, like I said, is going to be doing things like supplementing our steel production by just making directly steel pipe for us. This other one, we have fine concrete. I do think we're going to have an excess of quartz. I'll have to see when we actually get to making crystal oscillators just how much extra quartz we have, or if we even have any extra. But if we have an excess of quartz, this fine concrete recipe will allow us to use silica to make the limestone go a lot further, which we may want just to keep from needing to import so much limestone. There's a lot of limestone on the map, but importing it into the factory, getting it to the main base to be refined and stuff, can be unnecessary if we can actually just switch to this recipe instead, which is something we may want to be doing, but we won't know that until we start using quartz more. So I'm going to build a concrete factory with just our basic concrete recipe, and if later in the game we need more concrete, then I'm going to possibly switch to this recipe, or maybe some other recipes that we consider at that point. I'm going to wait till we get to that point to decide. If we have excess caterium, this is great for solving any wire issues we might have. I don't think we're going to have excess caterium. That being said, we do have excess iron, so we can make this iron wire recipe. It is pretty good. I've made it in the past, and it can be a little tedious because each machine doesn't produce a whole lot of wire, and so you need a lot of machines, and so that's one of the drawbacks to this recipe. With blueprints, that might not be a problem. I'll have to see how working with blueprints goes, but that could kind of stop being a problem simply because of how much easier it is to build with blueprints, and that we're planning a lot of space too. So these machines taking up space isn't too big of an issue. But this can be useful in helping us balance out our wire issue. That'll be a bit later into the game when we come across not having enough wire, and that and iron pipe is where our iron is likely to go, and then we'll be running short of iron. So those are things to keep in mind, and our future alternate recipes may be used to produce these resources in ways that are less taxing of some of our other resources. And then here, automated miner is a way to make miners to build miner Mark 1 and 2 and 3s around the map on resource nodes. You can automate portable miners so you just always have them ready. I'm not too bothered by this. There's only so many nodes on the map, but this could help in saving some handcrafting time. And then seamed copper sheets, we don't even have the building it's for, but this will be really helpful when we're looking to make copper sheets, which is one of the things that's going to tax our copper. If we end up using this to make copper sheets, then that's going to save us a fair bit of copper and maybe mean that we don't need to tax our iron supply as much in making iron wire, but we'll have to see when we get there. So that's all the recipes we're going to grab today. There's a lot of big plans going forward with our factory and setting up these bases of operation for kind of in production to get us into late game is the ultimate goal. We want to get into the late game. We're going to take over this rather large area that we have more or less hollowed out because of all of the biomass that we needed. And yeah, we're going to be taking it over. We're going to be building factories there. And the first factory that we're going to build, which you'll see in the next episode, is this limestone factory. Working out a little bit on the design, trying to figure out the spacing, if there's enough space for the machines. I like this here. We can have 4 assemblers, possibly, if we're doing that fine concrete recipe, or we can have a series of those, maybe squish them a little closer together for to fit a 6th one for just our basic concrete production. And then I'm working a little bit on the design on the outside on how that's going to look, because that will because we're building for aesthetics. We're not trying to rush through these sections. We're taking our time. We're using all the resources available to us, and I just feel like that will make the game a lot. I want to enjoy all of the game. I want to enjoy the full extent of what the creators have made for us, and so I'm taking my time with it, and we're going to see how this design goes. Next up is probably going to be setting up a blueprint, because I'm setting this up to produce a lot of concrete, and I feel like the best way to do that is to start setting up factory blueprints where I can take a bunch of constructors and they consume a bunch of resources and then they put them out. And that is the current plan of using this very special item, rather large, to set up some designs here. So here we go, Blueprint Designer. We're going to use it to make some recipes to refine our concrete, or refine our limestone into concrete and get that going. So that'll be all today. I will see you next time.